Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined us on always by my co-host Nick Filato. Went a little too fast there on the intro. And we spent some time discussing what our ideal scenario would be for quarterback position for the Giants this offseason. Nick and I had different opinions on it. That's the fun part about this. Today we're going to discuss secondary backup options for the Giants at quarterback. Because let's be honest, they don't have any quarterbacks on their roster or any current guys that they plan to move forward with. Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito. I think both Nick and I would hope they move forward without both of those players for this 2025 offseason. So the Giants are going to need multiple players, and they're going to need to do it in different ways. So I want to talk about some secondary options, and I don't think we're going to rank them like we did with the last podcast, but we're just going to drop a name and give our thoughts on that player, what it would cost. And one thing I want to mention before doing this, we will go over different projections for salaries for some of these players. I am personally of the belief right now on the Matthew Stafford situation, for example, Nick, and this goes for Rodgers too and anyone else. I am concerned with the compensation from a trade standpoint that the Giants would have to give up when it comes to Stafford. What draft picks, what draft capital? From a financial standpoint, and this is what's being discussed right now, Matthew Stafford's agent or somebody within that has floated, he's looking for $50 million a year guaranteed, which, by the way, Kyler Murray makes $46 million a year guarantee or AAV. Yeah. Daniel Jones got $40 million. This is the price to pay. It's the market. His level of play is high above Kyler Murray and obviously light years above what Daniel Jones is able to put on tape at 40. So that number means nothing to me from that standpoint. But from the Giants standpoint, from the cap standpoint, I am of the belief, and I will be strong and sturdy with this moving forward, Nick, that I don't care what it costs to get Matthew Stafford or any quarterback in here. And the reason being is that the salary cap is only of significance to me once the Giants are in a spot where they have a lot of players that they've drafted that they've re-signed. And I'll tell you why. One, the salary cap took a massive jump this year. It's going to take an even bigger jump projected in the future. The reason being, they are finally going to change the outdated process, I believe, for how they evaluate TV ratings. It used to be based on Nielsen, which I never really understood. I went to class for this, Nick. I took a class on this at one point. To me, it always sounded really dumb from the start, TV ratings. Like, it's silly. Like, I don't know how we've been living off it, but they're going to start to include YouTube TV and streaming options, which once those numbers come in, Nick, the next deal with the NFL and TV rights is going to be so massive that the salary cap is going to take such a massive jump that the Giants being cap healthy or not is so meaningless. It's about how many players you have young that you signed. And right now the Giants have Andrew Thomas, Dexter Lawrence. They're going to re-sign Malik Neighbors, hopefully. Outside of that right now, Nick, we're hopeful on players. Gavon maybe, Newbin, Drew Phillips. But they are not in a position where we have 6, 7, 8, 9 guys like the Chiefs or like some of these teams, the Eagles, that still somehow make it work despite having 7, 8, 9 guys on big contracts. So to me, the Stafford, the money is irrelevant. It is not meaningful at all in any way to me. Other people view the cap very differently. They want to stay cap healthy at all times. They're worried about being cap healthy. I never really understand why, unless it's, again, you have a ton of young players you want to resign. Because when it comes to free agency, let's not be the team that's looking to always have cap for free agency, because free agency is not a good place to go with your cap, and it's not something that's going to lead to long-term success. I just want to make that point first before we start discussing these quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. The cap is jumping from 277.5 or it's going to be somewhere between 277.5 million to 281.5 million. I want to say that's almost 100 million more than it was like 6 or 7 years ago. So it's just exponentially growing. It's a very lucrative business, the NFL. So the Giants should strike while the iron's hot if they need to sign somebody. I am right there with you, as long as it's not going to cripple them from a long-term standpoint. Stafford shouldn't, because it will probably only be about a 2-year deal.
Yeah, so let's have some fun on this podcast and talk about all sorts of secondary options for the Giants at quarterback. We're not going to go in any kind of order. We're just going to give a name and talk our thoughts on that player. Let's start with a fun one, Nick. Let's start with Aaron Rodgers. Now, Nick, I don't know this for sure, but from what I've gathered, it is not a situation here with Aaron Rodgers in free agency where it was Russell Wilson last year, where the former team, the Broncos, were paying his salary to the point where all he could do was sign for the vet minimum, Russell Wilson, with the Steelers, or else he would offset all the money that he already earned. I believe that Aaron Rodgers is free to sign, and the Jets are just on the hook for signing bonus money or prorated money, and he's free to sign for a deal. So with that in mind, my guess is Aaron Rodgers won't play for anything less than $40 million. We're looking at maybe 40, 45 type deal. Where's your interest level with Aaron Rodgers and the Giants?
I'm open to the Giants signing Aaron Rodgers, and that might be a little bit controversial, but from what I saw, still has arm talent, a lot of arm talent. I think he's vastly slower and looks older. So it's not my number one option. It's probably not my number two option going the Aaron Rodgers route. I don't know if he has any interest in signing with the Giants. I can see actually Matt Stafford being dealt and then him going back to California and playing for the Rams with Sean McVay, which would be interesting, but I would entertain it. Now that's a lot of money for Aaron Rodgers. I don't know if he would even sign for more than a 1-year deal. If he would do 2 years with an opt-out on either side, that could be possible, but I know it would be a significant upgrade over anything the New York Giants had. There are other free agents. Obviously, Matt Stafford's not a free agent, but there are other free agents that entice me more than Aaron Rodgers, but I am open to it.
Yeah, it's funny with this one, Nick. I don't want to say come full circle, but my opinion has changed a lot on this. I even recently tweeted about this and probably should have edited it or, gone back to it because my opinion's changed with some of the stuff I've gathered. But I was higher on the idea of Rodgers earlier than I am now. And I was higher on it because I looked at it like, well, I'm very, very big on trying to figure out what Theo Johnson is, what Wan'Dale Robinson is, what Neighbors is, and what Hyatt is. Luckily for me, Neighbors is so good that it hasn't mattered. He's been able to outshine his bad quarterback play. But it's not like it's been perfect, dude. We haven't really gotten to see what he's capable of on the vertical plane, with the exception of an occasional Doyle throw. And I guess the time he ripped that ball out of the Browns DB's hands when Jones just kind of like put a bad pass up. Other than that, he's been overthrown a million times in his rookie season. He's been underthrown at times. He hasn't been targeted at times when he's been open. So we really didn't get to see that. And when it comes to Hyatt, everyone's so sure he's a bust, but I'm not so sure. And the same goes for Wan'Dale. Everyone's so sure he's this underneath merchant. I'm not so sure, man. I think the quarterback play was so bad from an anticipatory standpoint and from a processing standpoint and from an arm talent standpoint, to be quite honest. Accuracy, velocity, and that one was more of middling league average. The other two were just horrific. Anticipation and processing were just really bad from the Giants' past quarterbacks. Arm talent, it's been okay, I guess. That I want to find out what these guys are. Same goes for Theo Johnson. And I don't want to wait another year. I don't want us to go into next offseason, Nick, like, oh, I guess Hyatt sucks. I guess Theo sucks. I guess these are just middling draft picks because their production sucks, when it's like, how much of their production is tied to the quarterback play? You and I know from evaluating this game, or at least we opine, that a lot of receiver production is dependent on a quarterback's ability to anticipate those windows being open, where to throw the football, and to lead the receiver into those windows. And when it's at the level it's been at, which has been insanely low for the Giants over the past however many years, it's very difficult to evaluate the receivers. You can evaluate them based on drops. That's not enough. That's not enough to evaluate a receiver based on. So for me, I thought maybe Rodgers can be that guy. I'm not so sure of that anymore, Nick. I've talked to a lot of Jets people that just believe that anticipation is not where it was. He's a tick slower, and that can happen at some point. It happened to Eli, right? Eli was not the same quarterback mentally at the beginning as he was at the end. Some people believe it's because of all the years being beaten down by a bad O-line. I don't know if that's the case. It could just be your reflexes. You're a tick slower. Everyone's different, right? Because we just talked about Stafford, who, let's be honest, on tape, dude, he doesn't look any slower from a processing standpoint. He may be even getting better in some ways in that system. Now it'll be a new system with the Giants, of course, if they make the move for him. But you add that to the baggage with Rodgers, the price, it's a lot. It's become an option that at first I was more excited about. I'm still open to it, Nick.
Yeah.
We're open to everything here, but it's now lower down my list.
And that's understandable. Now, with Aaron Rodgers, he had the same big-time throw rate as Matthew Stafford. And his turnover-worthy play percentage, according to Pro Football Focus, was one of the best in the leagues. Now, his yards per attempt and his ADOT, those were a little bit lower. He was playing behind a rough offensive line that was beat up. His receivers didn't do him any justice with a ton of drops. From the little bit of all 22 tape that I did watch of the Jets, I still saw an anticipatory passer. I still saw somebody who can split the seams. I still saw somebody who was processing at a high level, but I saw somebody who was slow. I saw somebody that when the rush was there, he couldn't really escape. And do you really want to buy into a 41-year-old 21-year-old quarterback now and give him 45. That's where my drawbacks are. But from a throwing standpoint and from an anticipatory standpoint, yes, that would still be a significant upgrade over anything that we saw last year. I just think there are better options available for the Giants to pursue. Yet, depending on what those options want to do, depending on where Rodgers is in his career, if he was interested in the Giants were interested, which I don't really think they would be based on John Mara, and that's conjecture, and I'm just kind of spitting out of my ass right now. I don't really think John Mara wants to bring Aaron Rodgers into the building, but I am certainly still open to it. I'm open to a lot of different things when it comes to the quarterback. I said it last time, I just want this position to be solidified. I just don't know if this would be the number one guy that you're going to bring in. And if you bring him in, if you bring Rodgers in, he is like your number one, right? Like you're not going to bring it. Like I'm more interested in bringing in some of these guys we're going to talk about in a little bit and have them have true competitions and have the cream rise to the top. I don't know if that would be the case with Aaron Rodgers. And if it was, would he cause some kind of stir? Would it be like a media firestorm if Aaron Rodgers ended up getting benched in week 4 or 5 because Justin Fields, who the Giants ended up outplaying him, which is, I don't know how plausible that is, but it's a scenario that I think we should keep ourselves open to. Now, if you sign a quarterback, though, for $45 million, would you go out and get a Justin Field? I don't know that either. So I'm kind of rambling here at the moment. But what are your thoughts, Dan?
I think what you're saying is really important, Nick, because that's what people discuss. And I don't claim to know what went on in that locker room and the reality of if he's as bad as the media has. I don't want to say the media, but just as he's been portrayed, whoever that's been. But I will say this. I am confident, knowing him, that he's not going to back up. He's not signing anywhere to be a backup. He's signing somewhere to be a starter. And the Giants would have to sell him the same pitch they're going to end up trying to sell Stafford about we can win now and the reasons why. It's a pitch we made last episode. Look at our first 5 games. The O-line was playing at a good level. The D-line was dominating teams, and we give you Malik Neighbors. It's a lot, and we give you the 3rd overall pick, whoever that may be, Hunter, Mason Graham, Abdul Carter, whatever it is. It's a potentially game-changing player in year 1, like Neighbors was. And that's the thing you're giving him. A blue chip last year, a blue chip this year. Neighbors is already a developed and realized prospect in my mind. He's only going to get better at this point. Same would hopefully be true about what you're offering at 3. So I don't know. I just think that, and I don't want to make too many proclamations about the anticipation and the process and that, because I didn't watch the tape. I'm going by what people who did told me, but they told me he wasn't challenging the areas of the field they thought he'd be challenging on a consistent basis. Now we can watch it, and I agree with you. When I've seen just broadcast, it looks like he's throwing with anticipation. It looks like he's zipping balls and ripping windows that we haven't seen tested for the Giants in a long, long time.
Yeah.
And
no bar.
A long, long time. And it's almost, in some ways, it's like the arbitrage play to Matthew Stafford, right? We get a quarterback that's similar, but we don't have to trade draft picks to get him. And from that standpoint, I'm interested. It's what drove me to him in the first place. But it's just a little bit off. I feel a little bit off with this one now.
It's the age. It's the age. I probably would have to watch a little bit more tape. I'm sure whoever your sources are watched a lot more than me. And maybe he's not challenging as frequently as he once was. And it's not as evident on his tape as it was back in his Green Bay days. I still just know it would be a big upgrade. And I think if he could stay healthy. Again, this is a year removed. Maybe he looked so bad on tape last year from a mobility standpoint because it was only 1 year removed from the Achilles, but he's also 41 years old. So you got to factor that in. There's a lot to factor in with Rodgers. It's a loaded and a controversial figure. But again, I remain interested. But there are other free agents I want to talk about. I'll only briefly bring one up because you touched a lot on him last episode, and I don't want to be redundant, but Jameis Winston. I'm very, very – I've been a fan of Jameis Winston for a very long time. I think he would immediately – add a penchant to throw the football down the field that Brian Daboll wants to see. But we also know this about Jameis Winston, and we also know this about Brian Daboll and all coaches. They don't like quarterbacks who turn the football over. And there really is not a quarterback in the league that turns the football over more than Jameis Winston. And for this reason, I can't have Jameis Winston be the only player the Giants bring in. He has to be packaged with somebody with upside, somebody like a Justin Fields or a player like that. Another like Matt Stafford, not necessarily him, but if the Giants were to go the rookie route, you get Jameis Winston, as you brought up on last episode as well. So I'm very interested in Jameis Winston. I don't know if it would cost you that much. This might be like a $9 million a year type of contract. I don't know Jameis's market, but I know he would unlock Malik Neighbors, and that would be such a fun offense, albeit you'd be ripping your hair out at the same time when it comes to his recklessness at times. But regardless of that, it would be a massive upgrade, and he would be one of my top free agents. I still don't think he's probably my top one, but I would have him, I think, over Aaron.
Yeah, I would have him over Aaron Rodgers as well. The price tag would be cheaper. Not that I care too much about that, but it would be. I think he'd be challenging areas of the field that maybe Rodgers isn't as willing to at this point in his career, or maybe that was just the offense he played in. It's hard to tell. But the proof is in the pudding. The production that came from that Browns receiver group with Jameis versus without Jameis was
It's insane.
really astounding. It's astounding, really. And those are not receivers who we could argue the Giants have as talented, if not more talented, receivers in their receiver room as the Browns did overall. Especially when you factor in Malik Neighbors and what we feel Wandell can be with a better quarterback play. I honestly put Hyatt in that group too. I know there's issues with his game, but if you get him in the right spots, put him more in the slot, get him some free releases, I really think that he can be a receiver who can challenge, specifically with a quarterback who can throw down the field and challenge those areas that Jameis can. Now, will you win games with Jameis? That's debatable. A lot of people think this turnover issue can't be fixed. It's fair to say that it comes in bad times. He's had it throughout his career. But one thing that's not debatable is he would be the best possible, in my mind at least, quarterback to pair with a Cam Ward if you were to sign Jameis and draft a Cam Ward. The reason being, he has already mentored quarterbacks before. He's already played second fiddle in QB2. And he's, by all accounts, a really great teammate and an uplifting teammate. And someone who I don't believe would present a problem if the Giants were to draft a quarterback after signing him. I can't say the same about Rodgers. I can't say the same about a lot of these quarterbacks who have started throughout their career.
I know. And I'm famished. We need some dubs. We need to eat some W's.
Yeah,
right?
He'll eat some dubs. All right, let's keep going here. We're gonna at some point bounce around though and talk that third overall pick and then future picks for quarterback. I know you haven't done, and I haven't either done as much work we wanted the tape. So it's going to be some ancillary thoughts that we have just from watching a little bit of these guys, but it's enough that we have to at least go in that direction. So let's first do some more free agents. I want to talk about a free agent who we haven't talked about really at all in the last few months. And I want to get your thoughts on him before I get into mine. And it's Derek Carr, who could be released by the Saints in a cap-saving move. New coach there in Kellen Moore. I have not heard his thoughts yet on Derek Carr. He may just be like, I'm moving forward with Derek Carr. We don't know the situation there. But say Derek Carr was released. I believe if he is, that would be a situation where the price tag would be pretty cheap. What are your thoughts on Derek Carr?
I would absolutely sign Derek Carr if the price tag is relatively cheap. Now, relatively cheap for a quarterback is still going to be over $30 million a year, more than likely. I don't know if I would want to hitch my wagon to Derek Carr long term, but he's not that old. He's, I think, 33 years old right now. Derek Carr will be 34 this season. And one thing we know about Carr is his processing and his memorization is up there with like the Sean McVays of the world. And this is something he's put on display just by reciting plays that he experienced years in the past, right? Now, people call him a check down Charlie. He was in an offense with no skill position players of note last year. I've watched Derek Carr let the ball rip sometimes. There are aspects of Carr that give me a little bit of hesitation. It doesn't seem like he likes to get hit that much. Now, I don't know what quarterbacks do. And I always feel like just a dick when I say that, sitting in my computer chair, not getting hit by other men, other grown ass 250-pound men. But it is an element of his past that has been brought up by players like Joey Bosa and other players who have said, like, if you hit Carr, you can get to Carr, right? But I do think he has a lively arm. He is a smart quarterback. He would be able to push the ball vertically, relatively speaking. Mute your thing if you're going to keep getting these text messages, buddy. And I would entertain that. I don't know how popular that is because he doesn't have necessarily the best reputation, Derek Carr. But 33 years old, if he can come in here, mesh with Brian Dable, push the ball vertically a little bit, it's something that you can get him on 1-2 year deal, relatively cheap, build around him, and then see if you can strike gold with a 33-year-old. I don't know if that's plausible, but it's something that I think I would definitely entertain. Yeah.
I don't know how to turn this off. It's not my computer, and this is really pissing me off with these text messages going on. I thought I figured this out, but doesn't look like I'm going to figure this out, so we're just going to have to mute. Hopefully they don't hit when I'm talking. As far as Derek Carr goes, it's very funny, Nick. I used to be a big Derek Carr hater. You know I hate Jimmy Garoppolo's game. I used to be a big Derek Carr hater when he was with the Raiders. And things have changed. I did a big evaluation of the Saints film in the first 3-4 weeks of the season last year. Do you remember when Clint Kubiak came in last year and they were like the hottest team in the NFL? They torched the Cowboys. They were torching teams and everyone was like, how the hell is this offense doing all this when they have Olave, but I think he was even like hurt at the time. He might have been playing, but wasn't making that a big impact. Not really anything else at receiver, not a good O-line, and Derek Carr. People were so surprised. And when I watched the tape, Derek Carr is a lot better than he was with the Raiders. He challenges windows he did not used to challenge. He is not a check down Charlie anymore at all. He'll throw with anticipation on the vertical plane, specifically the skinny and deep post that he does a really good job, in my opinion, of understanding safety leverage, where the safeties are on the field, and when he can take that shot. And he'll make stick throws and hole shots against covered different types of zone coverages that really surprise you. His arm talent is still all there. He's had multiple years of experience in process. I've come around a lot on Derek Carr, and I'm very open to the Giants signing Derek Carr. It is not going to be a popular opinion, Nick. I guarantee you, when we read the comments, because we're going over a lot of different quarterback names, the number one thing that people are going to hate on in our comments on this video is the idea that we're entertaining Derek Carr. He has a very poor reputation with NFL fans. I think if they watch the tape of the Saints, they might have a different opinion. I'm not saying he's a star. I'm saying he's different than I expected him to be. He takes more chances than you would think he does. And I think he could be a very underrated type option to do what we said, which is my number one thing, man. Develop these quarterbacks. There is no long-term solution with Carr, with Rodgers, with any of these guys. And I don't really honestly think they have any chance to win a Super Bowl or even compete. Let's not even go that far. Let's say win a playoff game, which was their cap with Jones, unless it's Stafford, to be honest. Maybe a couple other guys I'm going to go over, and the one guy I'm going to about to go over, maybe I can put him in there, and I could maybe entertain Rodgers, but I think it's capped there as well. But I think Derek Carr can develop these receivers the way I want them to be developed, and I need them to be developed. It's not want, I need. I cannot continue to waste away these receiver talents because their quarterback has no idea what he's doing pre to post snap, makes zero checks, and doesn't throw with any anticipation. It's what they've had, and they cannot continue to go in that direction. So he's someone I'm entertaining. Let me go over the one free agent, Nick, that I think has a chance. I want to say chance. That's what all it is. We're not saying it's going to happen, but a chance to be a long-term solution for the Giants, the only one in this market, in my opinion, and that's Justin Fields. Justin Fields, where are you at with him as a potential option?
Justin Fields, look, 25 years old, incredibly gifted from a physical standpoint, has no track record of throwing with anticipation. So a lot of people have said, look, this is Daniel Jones. This is the more athletic Daniel Jones. And I can understand why somebody would come to that conclusion. But I'll say this, Justin Fields has a much more lively arm than Daniel Jones. I can't necessarily say anything about, hey, he can just adopt this playbook and learn how to throw with anticipation, because he hasn't shown that, right? But I am wildly interested in bringing in Justin Fields and having him be the number 2 and saying that's where you're going to start. And then having maybe a Jameis, maybe a Russell Wilson, which would be funny, right? Which we haven't gone over quite yet, or another quarterback, maybe even a Matt Stafford, and having Justin Fields come in and learn behind not just that veteran quarterback, but also just be in the vicinity of Brian Daboll, to absorb Brian Daboll's playbook and to see if he can develop. Because we've seen players struggle in their first. Now, this would be Justin Fields' third team in as many years, but we've seen players struggle in the past, the teams that they were drafted, and then go to another situation. And by the time they're 26, 27, they hit full stride, like Sam Darnold did last year. I'm not necessarily confident that would happen with Justin Fields, but I wasn't a huge Justin Fields guy coming out of Ohio State. So I want to preface that to give full context. But regardless of the fact, this is a 25-year-old who has at least somewhat successful tape, who I know Brian Daboll will be able to devise a very creative and exotic offense just to use his legs and leverage his rushing ability. Now, if you can build on his passing and get him to develop, that's just gravy at that point. And if you're not relying on Justin Fields to be your starter, then you're hitting home runs if he does develop, because you have that contingency plan in place where Justin Fields can learn behind somebody who's a little bit more established. So yes, I am interested in Justin Fields. I don't think it would cost you all that much either. This episode is brought to you by Skims. Get your hands on the best underwear in the land. Look, I'm sure, gentlemen, you're a lot like me. You don't want your fit to be too compact, nor do you want to be swinging around like you're trying to destroy a piñata. You want everything in place. Comfort on a cloud with no ride-up. That is the ideal situation, and Skims provides that situation for us, gentlemen. They sent me a few pairs. I wear them to work. I wear them while I'm working out, and they are exactly what I'm looking for in my underwear. And Christmas is right around the corner. So grab a pair of Skims for someone in your life. Maybe that someone is you, and you want that comfortable underwear for your whole situation down there. So shop Skims Men's at skims.com. That's SKIMS.com. Let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show, Big Blue Banter, in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you're looking for the perfect gifts for the whole family, Skims just launched their biggest holiday shop ever. So visit skims.com to check that out and maximize your draw's comfortability.
Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by Manscaped, the global leader in men's lifestyle and grooming. Every man knows the unbeatable feeling of a fresh barbershop shave. Now, what if I told you that you no longer have to wait weeks or even months between appointments to experience it? Introducing Manscaped's newest innovation, the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver, the game-changing tool that brings the luxury of professional shave right into your home. Whether you're after that daily silky smooth finish or prefer to maintain a rugged 5 o'clock shadow, the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver is your go-to for precision and style every time. Head over to manscaped.com and join the over 11 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by using code BIGBLUE for 20% off. Gentlemen, this has changed the grooming game for me, and I highly recommend it for you. Get the Chairman Pro today and experience a shave that is as smooth as you deserve. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code BIGBLUE at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code BIGBLUE at manscaped.com.
When it comes to Justin Fields, Nick, he's an interesting prospect. He's shown no real signs, I agree with you, that he can process at an NFL level. He can throw with anticipation. He can challenge those windows. I think there's ball placement issues too here. Like I would say to the comparison of he's a more athletic Daniel Jones, and you talked about he's a much livelier arm. I think he has definitely better arm talent than Jones from a velocity standpoint. And that leads you to believe, okay, well, if it ever clicks for him mentally, he can stick the throws in those windows that Jones couldn't stick. But I think on a ball placement standpoint, he's worse than Daniel Jones. I've seen him miss a lot of throws in his years that just looked way off from a ball placement standpoint. And I don't, Jones, that was like that at the end for Jones, especially. But he was earlier in Jones's career before all the neck injuries. He was a little bit better with the ball placement. Now, I still think Jones was always kind of bad from the horizontal and things like that. But vertically, at least, Jones was a much better ball placer than Fields. And even last year, I would say Jones maybe was even more accurate, because I remember when Fields would come in and the Steelers would use him, he would kind of overthrow receivers and it just wouldn't be on target or anywhere really near. And I think part of that also, by the way, is anticipation. It's the timing. You have to have the rhythm and timing to know when to tee off and when to throw those deep balls and where the receiver is going to be within a route. So that scares me. But I think about it like this. Brian Daboll designed an offense for Daniel Jones in 2022 that really didn't ask him to do much as a passer, right? Especially from an anticipation and processing standpoint. Could he develop a similar offense for Fields, where he's doing a lot of QB bash again, and he's doing all these design runs and bootlegs, and he's kind of simplifying what Fields needs to read out? And could it work because Fields offers more athletically and Fields offers more from a velocity standpoint as a thrower of the football? And, at Ohio State, they found an offense that could utilize him as a thrower, by the way. I think that so far as coaches in the NFL, Arthur Smith and whoever's with the Bears, didn't do as good a job as what obviously Ryan Day did at Ohio State. Now it's an easier game at college, a different game. But still, there is something in there from a passing standpoint. We've seen it before at Ohio State. So it's intriguing to me. Like you said, he's 25, great velocity and great running ability. It's something where if some coach figures out how to make this game click for him mentally, you're talking about a quarterback that could end up being the steal of free agency.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. From that standpoint. And that's why I'm entertaining the Stafford or even a Rodgers, Russell Wilson, who we haven't gone over yet, and Justin Fields. Bring in that veteran, have the Giants compete right now, see what they can do, and then see if there is anything with Justin Fields, while also leveraging his running ability in red zone packages and in certain third downs, similar to what the Pittsburgh Steelers were doing. We know Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka, they're creative enough to do that for a player like Justin Fields. So that's, again, I don't want to sit here and just say, hey, we're interested in all these guys, but Dan and I, we're going over the ones that we are interested in.
Right.
And yes, Justin Fields, of the young quarterbacks who you don't want to say you're the starter, but you want to bring in to see if there's anything left, there are none that interest me more than Justin Fields. You have the Zach Wilsons of the world, and there's a lot wrong with Zach Wilson, right? He's 25 as well. And then there's another one that I want to touch on. I don't know if you want to go here yet, but we could briefly touch on this, and that's Mac Jones, who's going to be had at a fraction of the price of a lot of the guys we have talked about. Not necessarily inspiring, pretty uninspiring guy, has a past with Brian Daboll. Now, I don't know how much Daboll worked with him because I'm pretty sure he was redshirt back in 2017, but Brian Daboll was the offensive coordinator, so he must have a relationship to some degree with Mac Jones. And that's another one of those young players who's like 25, 26 years old that you can bring in with the Russell Wilson, with the Aaron Rodgers, with the Matt Stafford, and just see if there's anything there. And if there's not, no skin off your ass, right? And if something happens to one of the older quarterbacks, these guys are competent enough to go in there. They have starts under their belt. They have experience. They're competent enough to go in there and run the offense and not fall all over themselves like we've seen with so many backup quarterbacks in recent New York Giants memory.
Yeah, exactly right. And we can go over those options now. Zach Wilson, we'll just group them together, Zach Wilson and Mac Jones. I'd have more interest in Zach Wilson than Mac Jones because Zach Wilson has the arm talent that is exciting and got him drafted where he was.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
It's possible he could process things better in a different situation. The Jets' offense line was never good. I'm doubtful there. When it comes to Mac Jones, you're going to get a boost, I think, when it comes to the processing and the anticipation. It's what sold Bill Belichick on him. It's what he put on display at the Senior Bowl and at Alabama. Even times last year with Jacksonville, he found some success with Brian Thomas toward the end of the season by throwing and with anticipation. I watched that tape. Thomas was still producing with him because Jones got the ball out, but there were limitations too when you watch the tape. Jones would miss on throws that you just couldn't believe he would miss on, and Jones would throw a stupid boneheaded interception when he shouldn't have. And
let's be honest, can we have another quarterback named Jones too?
Yeah, I think I have another quarterback named Jones too. We don't want that. And on the vertical plane, he's a limited quarterback, and I think teams know that, and they can play the safeties up. So that always scares me. I like both of those guys more as like second quarterback to sign in free agency, which I'm open to as well.
Honestly, like 3-2 type quarterbacks. Like you don't really want them getting to the one spot. Whereas Fields is a 2, but those two with Wilson and Mac, they're more 3-2s. If the Giants are going to carry 3 quarterbacks, which at this point they may. It depends on who they get for their number 1. If it's Stafford, they might not. They might just roll 2. But if it's somebody that you're a little bit uncertain of or a rookie, you might roll 3.
And I don't mind. Look, if they're going to sign 2 players in free agency, I don't mind that, Nick. Even if it costs them at the end a few million in dead cap because they have to cut one of them, it's a better situation to me than going into the draft with 1 and being like, shit, we have to force quarterback. At least that gives you so much flexibility in the draft to the point where you don't have to force quarterback if it doesn't fall to you the right way. I mean, a draft falls in different positions. You cannot predict a draft. You're better off planning, in my opinion, preparing for the worst than assuming, oh, we're going to get a quarterback, so we only need to sign 1 guy.
There's one more young guy I want to go over, and then I want to go back to guys who like the Russells and the Sam Darnolds of the world. But one more young guy, and that's Trey Lance. So Trey Lance, the Dallas Cowboys traded a 4th-round pick to San Francisco to get him, and then they just started Cooper Rush the entire time, and this guy never saw the football field. I don't know what's wrong with Trey Lance. Remember when he was coming out of North Dakota State? He was there during that COVID year, so he only had a handful of starts under his belt, like a season's worth of play under his belt. But the physical traits, they were tantalizing, especially for San Francisco, because they ran a similar system where it was predicated on bootleg action and it was a pro style system. So he was making a lot of checks and a lot of calls at the line of scrimmage, helped setting the protections, all of that. But then he couldn't really find the field for either team. Now, injury was one reason, and Brock Purdy was the other reason for San Francisco. But what are your thoughts on a young guy? I think he's 25, maybe even young. He might be 24. He's still very young. And him with Daboll, it's enticing. What are your thoughts on Trey Lance?
It's interesting. It's like a version of the Zach Wilson play, right? You're betting on the raw traits that haven't been developed at all. The issue with both Wilson and Lance is, and even more so with Lance, is it's the lack of experience. It's the lack of reps. It's how do you improve as a quarterback when you're just watching and you're just in the meeting rooms. Some people believe you can. Others believe you can't. I lean more towards you can't. You need to experience those live game reps. But as a 3-2, like you said, I like the idea.
Okay, now let's go back to Russ. I want to touch on Russell Wilson because the Giants and Russell Wilson flirted a lot last season to the point where the Giants were possibly going to sign him, but they allowed him to walk out the building. He went to Pittsburgh and he signed. There's a lot of
By the way, let me say this too, Nick. It's not the first time they had this foray. It was reported by ESPN's, I believe, Seth Wickerstrom, and this is an ESPN article with sources cited that they were one of the teams that contacted the Seahawks alongside the Broncos to try to trade for Russell Wilson at that point.
Yeah. So there have been a lot of connections between.
Thank God they didn't do that.
Yeah, and devastating. But yes, Russell Wilson, and look, you're not going to get him for like $1.5 million like the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like you're probably going to have to put up maybe 40 for him, maybe a little bit less. I don't exactly know what his market is. That's really going to dictate it. But what are your thoughts on him, Russell Wilson? Because I watched him last year, and dude, he was one of the best deep ball throwers in the NFL, and the stats substantiate that. Now, a lot of those deep passes are outside the numbers. He's never really been a player who's great targeting over the middle of the field. A lot of people believe that's because he's like 5'11". He can't see as well over the offensive line. He did not work a West Coast system well when he was with Nathaniel Hackett. That was not his bag at all. Now, his second year in Denver was a lot better under Sean Payton, and we saw what he was able to do with Arthur Smith last year, albeit it really trended downwards. I don't think the Pittsburgh Steelers scored 20 points on offense in their final 5 games of the season, but you're still looking at a big upgrade and somebody who I would love to see his moonballs to Malik Neighbors and Jalen Hyatt down the football field. So I have interest in Russell Wilson being paired again with a Justin Fields or another player. But what is your thoughts on this? I think like 37, 38-year-old quarterback.
A bunch to tackle there.
36.
So first of all, yes, a bunch to tackle that. First of all, we were strong on saying that Joe Shane made a mistake and not bringing him in last year and saying you can start. Daniel Jones is the backup, or at worst, Daniel Jones will compete with you.
He was the life raft for him.
Yeah, and he screwed that up. But let's be clear, that was when he was $1.5 million.
Yeah.
So if Nick and I are not as strong, which clearly we are not, on signing him this offseason, we're not being hypocritical. We're not going back. We're just understanding the difference between signing him at a similar price. With that said, I did make the point earlier that I'm not so worried about the financials of the cap situation as we move forward. So with that said, I am interested in Russ. And you mentioned all of the deep stats substantiate what you saw on film and what I saw on film. It's true. He was the best deep ball passer in the NFL. And yes, it fell off at the end of the season, but that's because George Pickens got hurt and wasn't there. So you could say, oh, so he was relying on Pickens. That's not good. Well, guess what? If he signed with the Giants, he'd have Malik Neighbors. That's good. You can afford to rely on a wide receiver if you have Pickens, and you're going to get Malik Neighbors, who is a better wide receiver than George Pickens in every aspect of the game. And so when I look at that, when I look at the tape, which shows it, and when I look at the stats that back it up, as far as the best deep ball thrower in the NFL last year, which is crazy to say, but kind of does check out eye test wise, Nick, doesn't it? Like he kind of puts the ball in really great spots on the vertical plane.
And we saw it against the Giants too, man.
What'd you say?
We saw it against the Giants.
Right. I mean, maybe part of that. Yeah, maybe it's biased because we saw like the final throw he made to win that Giants game was just one of the best deep throws I've seen of the year. It was placed perfectly. And
I've watched 5 games of Russell Wilson because I did a piece for Big Blue View on him. It's all throughout his tape.
Yeah.
It's all throughout his tape. Now, Russell Wilson will still make his mistakes, but he is a quick processor, especially when it's that first read. You got to read this one defender. That one defender does one thing. He has the option. He has the understanding of what to do with the football, whether it be man or zone coverage. So from a processing standpoint, Russell Wilson is he's still operating at a high level. And then that arm is still lively. It still pushes vertical. It's just the middle of the field is my big concern with Russell Wilson's, because
we never had the middle of the field, so we're not going to get it. We haven't had it in the past, and we wouldn't get it in the future if we signed him.
No, I think Daniel Jones might have been better over the middle of the field than he was outside the numbers. Daniel Jones did not attack outside the numbers unless it was boundary. Like it
depends what you mean by middle of the field. Like I was thinking more of like the Drake May version of middle of the field, like that 10 plus range. Jones was never attacking that area really. He did dig occasionally. He did the dig to Slayton. We see that 5 dozen times on tape over the 6 years, but maybe fewer. But like the overall, that wasn't an area of the field defenses were worried about him attacking.
No, but with Russ, you have that threat. It's one-on-one, middle of the field, close. Safety's in the middle of the field. He's going to look it off, and he's going to hit that other guy once he gets that back foot, and he gets rid of the football pretty quickly as well. So, yeah, that's another reason why I'm interested. And it feels weird being so interested in these old quarterbacks, but that's exactly what this is. This is the
life.
Reality. This is the life of a New York Giants fan at this moment. It's not that I want to have these older quarterbacks. It's that I just am aware of the situation and that these older quarterbacks probably provide the best resolve to this absolute madness that we've been stuck in, this mire, this absolute mud pie that we've been eating for how long, bro?
It's a wake-up call, Nick. To me, it's a wake-up call to those who shrugged it off and said, don't worry about us missing out on the 2024 quarterback class. It's a wake-up call. Now this is the reality you live in. You have to be interested in quarterbacks like this because otherwise it's Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito again, or Mike Glennon and Fromm, like we had that one year. And Jones is in the mix in all these years, but not really providing much either from a starting standpoint. And as far as Russ goes, I will agree. We might, because I was thinking of more like the intermediate middle of the field, but and that kind of underneath stuff, that was what Jones did a good job of, I guess, like the timing on the quick game underneath. That might not be there with Russ because he, like Kyler Murray, he really doesn't even utilize that area of the field. So it would be a lot of what I think the Steelers did with Arthur Smith, some bootleg. You'd watch Arthur Smith kind of bootleg him out and let him kind of use what's left of athleticism, let him throw on the run. Dable can do that as well. And then just attacking vertically, which he can still do outside the numbers. That's something the Giants haven't had since Tyrod. And Eli and won't really have unless they sign a quarterback like this. Now, I will say one thing that we didn't add with Russell, and we'll end it here. There was a story that came out after the season because you talked a lot about how the production did come down for the Steelers. And they were, at one point, it was like, wow, Russ is cooking. Like, they were 12 wins. They were, I remember at one point, they were number one in the power rankings, the Steelers. And I said earlier, Pickens played a big role in that, and he did. But also a story came out at the end of the season that earlier in the year, Russ was making his own calls. And then Arthur Smith was like, no. And he had a whole freak out and they had a bad, I guess, meeting or whatever it was. And Arthur Smith's like, this is not how this offense is running. I'm going to tell you what we're calling. And that's it. And things went downhill after that, according to that story that came out. Is it true? Is it not true? I don't know. My guess is
Russell's agent putting that out there.
Is it Russell's agent putting it out there? I don't know, but I will say this. I wouldn't be surprised if Russ wanted to call more passes and against certain looks that didn't look like they were that advantageous for the run. And Arthur Smith is like, nope, it's in my DNA that when I call run a lot and we keep running. And that could have clashed, possibly. Now, the good news on that front, and I've only brought this up to say this, Nick, and I'll close out with this, is that Brian Dable is a pass-heavy coach. He wants to be pass-heavy. He's not Arthur Smith. So that could mesh a little bit better with Russ.
I think that's valuable information. Again, we don't know for a fact, but valuable nonetheless. So I want to go over one more primary target. Like this guy would be the number one quarterback.
These are all secondaries. Remember, we already said our primaries, Stafford and Ward.
Well, yes, but these are options. A lot of these guys, like, look, if the Giants signed Russell Wilson and Russell Wilson was the number one quarterback, I'm not throwing a fit. Like, I get that. That's what I mean. Yes. Right. So there's this other quarterback that we haven't really discussed much, who we have to bring up because he is an option, and that's Sam Darnold. Now, me personally, when it comes to Darnold, I think Darnold has a lot of talent. I think he's a very talented kid. He's 27 years old, still young, still mobile. He's coming off the best season by far, his only really true competent season. It did not end well. I do not like paying up on an asset when it's at its highest. And you're talking about giving more than likely a long-term contract to Sam Darnold and tying 45 maybe a year into him. And for that, I'm not interested. Now, the market could dictate something different for Sam Darnold since that Detroit game and then what we saw in the playoffs. We just saw the Vikings absolutely collapse, and it was really bad. And it reminded a lot of people, especially the Detroit game, of the Sam Darnold from Carolina and the Sam Darnold from the New York Jets. With that said, I love his talent, but I'm not interested because I just think it's going to just be he's better than Daniel Jones, but it could be another one of those situations that the Giants would be walking into after him leaving the Vikings with KOC and Justin Jefferson and this great infrastructure and coming to the Giants, who I think have a good infrastructure or a solid infrastructure in place, but not nearly. I hate to say this, but I have a lot more respect for KOC than I do Brian Dable. And I just don't know if that marriage would work. So for that, I'm out on that one. What about
As you should, by the way, when it comes to those two coaches. Look, when it comes to Darnold, I'm on the same page as you. Now, my mind would change depending on his market. If his market dictates, Nick, that all he can get is a 2-year deal, now I could look at it in the prism of this is like trading for Stafford or signing Rodgers or Russell. And how do I view him versus those guys? And versus those guys, I don't think it's too far off in one direction or another besides Stafford. I think it's way above any of these guys as far as just pure quarterback play goes. And in that regard, I can get a little bit more interested. But, man, we've seen it not work with him in the New York media already. I think being outdoors is not good for him personally. He didn't look good in Carolina and some of those outdoor games. I just believe some of those quarterbacks in domes look a lot different in domes versus out of domes. I think he benefited a lot from simplified – I don't want to say simplified offense, but look, when a whole defense is tilting their attention to Justin Jefferson and you have a one-on-one with somebody like Addison who can consistently win one-on-ones, you could continue to just hit that one-on-one over and over and over again. And that's what he did a lot of times with Addison this year. I watched the games where they were just totally shifting coverage toward Jefferson and they would take advantage of Addison. So there's some question marks for me there. It's something that I'm not interested in, really. He'd be one of my least options of the guys we named. But again, he's young and has some arm talent for sure. And if it did click for him, it did. But there's still question marks about how he can handle pressure, right? And how he can play against the blitz.
Yes. But again, he's a talented guy. If the market dictated, I would not be upset with that. But it's trending, or at least it seems like his market's going to be pretty large and he could command.
And long-term, maybe.
Yeah, and long-term. So that's one of the reasons why I'm more out on that. All right. So.
And there are also question marks, by the way, one final thing on that, about his anticipation. A lot of people believe he's a see it, throw it kind of guy, which Jones was. And, there's examples people use to counter it. And then other people I've read have been like, no, that's really not a good example of anticipation. And so it's hard to know exactly if he can do it with consistent to a consistent degree, but he certainly didn't do it in that playoff game against pressure or down the stretch.
No, not down the stretch. The only all 22 tape I watched of him was week 1, and he didn't really have to do all that much in week 1. He had a couple really nice throws outside the numbers. It was like Kevin O'Connell was just like, oh, they're playing cover 3. Cool. We'll just do this. Oh, they want to go in quarters. Let's run the football with Aaron Jones. It was pretty simple on the Vikings part. The Giants were just like, what the hell are we doing? Like, I don't know. It was tough. But yes, so before we get into the draft, which we'll briefly touch on, there are a few other of those.
One more guy.
There's one more what?
One more guy that is interesting.
Okay, so you want to talk about Kirky?
Well, we didn't talk about Kirk, actually. That wasn't even the guy, but let's talk about Kirk, and then I'll get to the guy I was considering.
Yeah, if he's released and he passes physical and his arm's not cooked, yes, I'm interested. We could probably leave it there. I don't think it would command much money, but I don't know. I'm not really interested in Kirk to be. You are definitely that number one guy. Like, that would be more of that, you need a strong contingency plan, because you could be week 3 and Kirk's arm could just be shot. I don't know if that was injury related. That's what it seemed like this past season with the Falcons. It looked like Kirk Cousins was out there and his arm was just cooked by week 5, week 6, after he went off for the 500 yards or 400 yards, whatever he did against the Buccaneers. But again, people rumored that he had a shoulder issue. If that's the case, that's fine. But if it's not that, and it's just because the age is catching up to him, which the tape suggests that it was down the stretch, then I'm a little bit more hesitant with a guy like Kirk.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to apologize again for these dings that you might have hearing on the podcast or watching. I'm using my mom's computer because my computer is fried and broke. So you can direct all your hate towards her. Just kidding. She's an absolute saint. And if you do that, I'll come find you and I might kill you. No, I shouldn't say that. I won't kill you, but I will definitely not be happy with you. So I don't know what I would do in that scenario. But anyway, back to this situation. When it comes to Kirk Cousins, Nick, it's weird because I watched the early tape with the Falcons, new system, right? New coach, hasn't played with these receivers. And there were some unbelievable moments. The Eagles game on tape, dude, some anticipated throws that were like, wow, that's classic Kirk. Doesn't have O'Connell anymore, doesn't have the Vikings infrastructure, no Jefferson, and he's still just dotting balls with anticipation to Darnell Mooney on outs and on skinny posts. And then it all collapsed for him. So is that possibly injury related? If it is, it kind of depends on the workout, but if it is, and people work him out and it looks like, there was a shoulder injury, now it's recovered, or, the Achilles, he's able to push off it more now and get drive and more, velocity on the football. He's the best bargain. He's this year's Russell Wilson, right? He's 1.5 million because the Falcons are going to be paying his salary. He's going to be a 1.5 million or whatever the league minimum signing is. And when he's right, he throws with more anticipation than anyone in this group, including Jameis Winston, not including Stafford, obviously, and probably not Rodgers, but maybe at this point. And he can make all the throws. And more importantly, he tries to make all the throws. He throws. We always discussed this when he was with the Vikings. He used every inch of that field.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing with Kirk, if the Falcons are paying 1.5, I was unaware of that. If that's the case, then yes. But would you have to do the whole guarantee the starting spot to him?
Yes.
It really depends on what his other options are. And those other options, like say the Pittsburgh Steelers or a team like that come to him and say, yeah, you'll be the like, that's where it gets a little hairy, because you can get a Kirk Cousins, but then you could bring in a Justin Fields or a player like that. Some of these other players that we talked about, I'm very open to that. It's just how serious are you taking this? This is your job. You're the number one guy, no matter what type of situation. Now, if week 3 rolls around and he sucks, I could see the Giants just, they do what they have to do and they bench him, and that could cause a distraction in the locker room. But if that arm is still, if it's what we saw in the beginning of last year, and fatigue will not wear and tear will not take away from its overall effectiveness down the stretch, like week in and week out, absolutely, especially if it's 1.5, that'd be crazy.
Yeah, it would rise to the top, very close to the top of my list if he is still right. And
if he's released.
Yes. All those things have to be in play. The physical is the most important part, though, because he'd be damn good for Malik Neighbors. I'll tell you that. You could see it from what he did with Justin Jefferson. He would do some things with Theo Johnson as well. I think he'd be really good for Theo as well. As far as the other receivers go, it remains to be seen, but he can definitely work with a talent like Wando Robinson as well. But again, he has to be healthy. The last one I want to bring up before we talk briefly on the draft, guys, would be Joe Flacco, because Joe Flacco impressed me with the Browns. Threw with anticipation, made all the throws, still has great arm talent, velocity. And then he looked pretty good with the Colts, I thought. The game against the Giants, he looked pretty damn good in that game. And he's going to be cheap, and he kind of provides what I said, like my main goal for this offseason at quarterback. It's make sure we at least have somebody in there who can develop these receivers by throwing with anticipation and challenging all areas of the field. Because if we don't at least get to that baseline, dude, we're so freaking screwed long term.
I love that Joe Flacco league still, man.
What'd you say?
I love that Joe Flacco's in the league.
Oh, yeah.
Like this is somebody who was drafted when we were in like high school, and he's still out there slaying. I mean, so is Aaron, but like Aaron, we all look at and he's like, oh,
he's a Hall of Famer. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Flacco is like, oh man, he's still doing it. Great. Good for you, man. He struck while the iron was hot and got a big old contract from Baltimore. And we all thought he was cooked once he left the Ravens. Then he's able to lead the Browns to the playoffs in that magical season. And he's still doing his thing. He's got to be like 39, right? Probably
he's got to be old, 39, 40, somewhere in that range. But yeah, he's the last guy I would consider just because he'll provide that baseline. All right, let's talk a little bit about pick 3. Go ahead.
I just real quick want to list a couple names for those for that 2-3-3-2 range of quarterbacks that we were mentioning before.
Yeah,
Carson Wentz is one of them. I know he's a unique individual who was once an MVP candidate, probably would have won the MVP in 2017 if he didn't tear his ACL against the Rams. Nick Mullins, Jacoby Brissett, and then Garoppolo as well as a 3-2. Now, I don't know the upside of Jimmy Garoppolo, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not as interested in him, but I wanted to throw his name out there just because he's somebody who I thought had pretty good tape in the one appearance he made in week 18 under Sean McVay. So yeah, those are some of those other 3-2 type names.
Yeah, look, I'll defer to you on what you saw from Garoppolo that day. It might be worth exploring as a 3-2, especially when you're comparing it with other names like we mentioned, Zach Wilson, Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz I have zero interest in personally at all. I think he's shot. And you mentioned some of the weird locker room stuff with him. But Jimmy might be something as a 3-2, at least has veteran leadership. I've just never been a Jimmy Garoppolo guy personally.
Hey, I feel you.
I don't really like what he offers. But yeah, let's talk a little bit briefly about the draft scenarios that could play out. I've mentioned that my number one ideal scenario would be Cam Ward at 3. Have you put any thought into if this is the type of quarterback class you would want the Giants to use the 3rd pick on at quarterback, knowing the opportunity cost that's at play? We lose Hunter, we lose Graham, or we lose out on Carter.
Now, Carter and Hunter or Graham could be gone by those points if
Yeah.
Cam Ward would or fall to 3. I have no interest in trading up at all. I am open to taking a player like Cam Ward, somebody who is an improviser, somebody who is a playmaker. I only have the one game of all 22. I watched a lot of Saturday football, broadcast football, and Cam Ward, as you said last episode, does seem to rise to the occasion a lot of the times. His game has significantly progressed from his Washington State days. He's come from, like, I don't even, like, what star recruit was he when he was at, like, Incarnate Word? You know what I mean? Like, he's really has, like, this unique trajectory from somebody who started literally at the bottom, as Drake was saying, and now he's up at the top and being considered a top 5 selection. But there was a lot of tape in his past, not necessarily in this last season, where he was a little bit more reckless with the football. Can he, with the pressure of the NFL, can he remain calm and poised like he was in 2024 while also still being this incredible improviser and playmaker and creative type of quarterback running around, yet still being able to keep his eyes down the football field? But with all that said, yes, I am interested in him at 3 if the Giants don't get a Stafford. And even if they do, I have interest. It probably wouldn't be my number 1 option unless they felt like he was truly this number 1. I don't want them to convince themselves, a la Dave Gettleman in 2019 with Daniel Jones, just because they like him and then pass up on somebody that they love who can really help this roster if the Giants do have like a 2-year fix at quarterback. It really needs to be a true conviction from Shane and Dable on Cam Ward. So long story short, I have interest, but I don't think it would be my number 1 option, especially if the Giants get one of these competent veteran quarterbacks. But I only say that with the 1 all 22. So keep that in mind.
And I think it's fair to say that if you don't think it would be your number 1 option, that might change again when you watch more tape. It might not, though. A lot, I think, is, with regards to the tape go, a lot remains to be seen with that. But I think based on what you said, you are probably true in what you said. You're not interested in any kind of trade up for Ward or any of these quarterbacks.
I don't want to trade up at all, man. I don't think the Giants are really in a position to get that. And I don't know if it behooves Joe Shane to do that. I don't know if it makes sense. And I know this is supposed to be an exercise of what we want, but put yourselves in his shoes right now. You trade up, you're losing a lot of assets. Now, it could be a desperation thing where you trade a lot of next year's assets and it won't be the general manager next year who's having to deal with it more than likely because he'll be fired. But you're relying on this rookie quarterback to come in and lead this team to a promised land against a really tough schedule. And I just don't see how Joe Shane was going to be like, this is our number 1 option. Like, he's going to sign one of these guys, whether that be Winston, Russell Wilson, or Derek Carr if he's released, or Kirk Cousins if he's released. Like, they're going to pursue that, or they're going to try desperately to get Matt Stafford. I just hope that doesn't involve trading the 34th overall pick to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider from that standpoint. I think, as I mentioned, my number 1 scenario would be play it patiently to understand the market. Because here's the key. The Titans don't seem very interested in drafting a quarterback here. The Browns, I'm not sold that they're going to draft a quarterback here either. If these teams aren't willing to draft a quarterback at 1 or 2 when they need a quarterback desperately, what does that say about how the NFL, your competition, views these quarterbacks? Like, how worried do you have to be about a team trading all the way up to 1 or 2 to jump you? I'm not necessarily sure you have to be so worried. And even if you could look at it on the other hand, which I know a lot of fans have said, like, if all you have to do is give up a 3 now and 3 next year to move up to 1 and get your quarterback, you got to do it. You have to do it. I think you got to play the market, in my mind. I think you got to be, if you want to be a great GM, you have to understand what is the market actually dictates. Instead of just saying a blind, no matter what, if you want a quarterback, you trade up for him in any market. Some markets, you don't need to make that move, in my mind. You don't need to give up all that capital to move up. I'm not sold this is one of those markets where you do. I'd be open to a minor trade up for Cam Ward, personally. As far as sitting at 3 and taking any other quarterbacks, I know you haven't watched a lot of tape. I find it probably unlikely you'd consider anyone but Ward, Sanders, Dart.
Yeah, I like to reserve some judgment just because, and again, I've watched a lot of tape, not on the quarterbacks. It's like you guys can go check out my evaluations on offensive linemen and defensive linemen and corners and all that over there at Giants Country with Patricia Traina's site. But the quarterbacks, I've not done my evaluations on them quite yet. So this is a little bit of an incomplete notion and an incomplete opinion of mine. But yes, from the little bit that I have seen, I'm not eager to be parting ways with picks. And the reason why I'm comfortable saying that is because the little bit that I did see last year of Drake May, of Jaden Daniels, of Caleb, I was more eager to part way. Like, I knew it very early on, right? Like these guys, I'm not sure. I don't know it very early on, right?
Let's not say 4 picks, Nick. I want to talk about 3, just sitting at 3 and taking.
I thought you just said that the trade. Okay, yeah, sitting at 3. Yeah, okay.
Well, let me start by saying this. I don't think you need to watch tape to know that you probably don't want Kyle McCord at 3. You probably don't want, name some of these other guys. Tyler Shuck at 3. You don't want any of these guys at 3. So I think we can eliminate just about anyone for consideration at 3 for this podcast. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and Nick Filato has a hot take on Shuck or on Kyle McCord, and is like, you know what, I love this guy. I'll take him at 3, and we'll find out later. That's okay. But for now, I want to rule out everyone but Dart and Sanders. We already talked about Ward. Maybe Dart. I mean, that feels a lot like a Daniel Jones 2019 if you said to take him at 3. But as far as Dart and Sanders goes, I know you haven't watched a lot. What are your thoughts on taking either of those guys at 3?
I've seen no all 22 of Jackson Dart. Shador, I've seen the one game, and it was, I think, probably his worst game by a lot of people's estimation. I'm sorry?
Nebraska, I assume?
No, I think it was Kansas.
Oh, no, Kansas was – Nebraska wasn't good, but Kansas was even worse, yeah.
Yeah. So it was the Kansas game. And no, I'm not really interested in taking him at 3. I think it would be a risk, and I think there's an opportunity cost to doing that. And that opportunity cost is getting the blue chip. Now, if the Giants wanted to trade down, could they explore that option? Sure. But there are other teams that are quarterback hungry who are picking in the top 10, like the Raiders, who also might move up, or they might just sit put and take a guy like that. So you really need to factor all that in. But I don't want to put myself on the record when it comes to – I saw one game, and a lot of people are saying it's his worst game.
Yeah.
It's not a game that jumped out to me. Like, you're telling me that's a first overall or a possible top 5 pick. I would have never guessed that watching that game. Again, just one game though. Now I watched him on Saturday, and he makes some plays. Justin Hunter was huge for him, but it's not necessarily somebody that I have any conviction on whatsoever right now.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit more on these guys so far. I've seen more games of Sanders than I have any quarterback in this class. I've seen 6 from Sanders now, and I saw 5 from Ward, and I saw only 1 from Jackson Dart. I've seen a few from Shuck because he intrigues me, but that's where I'm at with this class right now. I saw 1 from Kyle McCord. So having seen what I've seen from Sanders, I understand the idea of Sanders and where it could go right. He's got a really smooth throwing motion, and the ball comes out pretty smooth as well. I wouldn't say it jumps out of his hand with any kind of velocity or immediacy to it, but it's smooth. It comes out nice and clean with a tight spiral and kind of like I don't want to call it a looping action, but like an over the top type of action. And he could change arm slots too. And I actually think he's really good at throwing on the run, on the move. I think that's where some of the most velocity from him comes, not from when he's within a pocket, but from when he's running around, because he does a ton of this like drifting in the pocket thing and then like trying to reset the pocket, which part of it I like, part of it I don't, because it's like he's not very athletic, Nick. And if he's not always getting away with it at college, for sure he's not going to always get away with it at the NFL level. Though, again, it's hard to say because his O-line was so fucking bad at Colorado. I want to make that clear. And I hate to go down that path too, because then we're going back down the Daniel Jones path of the O-line so bad. What would it be like if it was good? But as far as just what jumps out on tape with Sanders, it's almost where it ends with me. I know a lot of people think he's an insanely accurate quarterback because they cite the completion percentage. But I think when you watch 6 games or however many you need to watch, you do see a lot of throws around the line of scrimmage, wide receiver bubbles. Those are going into the completion percentage, right? Like, I don't want to use completion percentage when it comes to accuracy and ball placement. I do think he is accurate. I think he has good throws with good ball placement, and that comes down to having that repeatable throwing motion, and the ball comes out nice, Nick. But I don't think it's anything insanely special. I don't think the anticipation thing, that's where it really, like, I struggle to see these wow moments of anticipation that I guess some people see or they believe can happen at the next level. To me, that was what I want to see with Sanders. Like, I think the high end comp for Sanders, Nick, is Bryce Young. But I remember back to Bryce that I watched at at Alabama, and I saw a lot of wow moments of anticipation from Bryce at Alabama. And I think anyone could see that when you watch his tape. And maybe you could say it's because he had a better O-line, and that's, Sanders, if you give him an O-line, you'll start to see those. I think that's definitely in play as a possibility. If Sanders is going to be a great quarterback at the NFL level, it's going to be with his mind and with his anticipation and with the ability to just have that repeatable throwing motion behind a good old line where you could just bing, bang, boom, and pick apart a defense with your mind and with just having consistency to your game. But I didn't see it. I haven't seen it enough at Colorado so far. So it's a projection that could get to that. And as far as the other stuff, like wow stuff that jumps off the tape with Ward, moments of wow stuff with Ward, I don't necessarily see it with Sanders. I talked to somebody who I've mentioned this on a podcast like 3 months ago, who works in college scouting, was at one of their games. I don't remember if it was Kansas. It was a cold weather game, but he texted me immediately after the game. He's like, man, dude, that arm did not look good in the win. Like it didn't look good. And I think a lot of people have question marks about his arm talent. Dane Brugler mentioned that, or his velocity and arm talent. Dane Brugler, Cy, who we've had on the podcast, has a 2nd round grade on him because of that. How is his arm talent going to hold up at the NFL level?
Really showed up in the Kansas game too. On that
big throw. In the Kansas game.
That was a rough one, man.
The final throw was so rough. The one I put on Twitter, you can go find it for those. I put the all 22 view on Twitter for those who find it. That final throw, I mean, the receiver was open early, and I don't want to blame him for that. Maybe it's not part of the progression because you want to see better anticipation, obviously, there. But when he finally does realize that's the throw to make, that ball hangs forever, and a Kansas DB is breaking on it. Like if a Kansas DB is breaking on it,
they got some good DBs this year.
I know they do some good DBs.
Kobe Bryant and Melo.
And all of them wouldn't be in the top 20 DBs in the NFL, right?
Yes.
Or like, top 30 right now. And that's whatever you're facing on a week-to-week basis. And so now I think about that arm in the MetLife Stadium, and it just does concern me. Like there's stuff to like about Sanders. I don't want to bury him yet. At 3, I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
Sanders, if you told me you could get him at the top of round 2 where players like Drew Brees were taken, Will Levis, Derek Carr, some that have worked out, some that haven't. I'm very interested in that point. I'm taking that gamble. At 3, to me, it feels like the opportunity cost that we're missing out on. Again, it reminds me of last year. And I was, some will say I'm wrong. We were wrong about that, Nick, and they should have taken Nix and Penix. I still think I want to wait 3 to 5 years before you consider a quarterback right or wrong. Like how many times have we seen a quarterback get off to a hot start and then regress? It's happened a lot in the NFL history, and people, you're wrong. And then, people said about Daniel Jones, right? After his rookie season, a lot of people were like, oh my God, these idiots had a 2nd round grade on him. How could they have, not us specifically? I'm saying like all the draft media, like how could these guys have a 2nd round grade? And they were so wrong about him. And now, you watch it play out over 6 years, and all those people who said they were wrong ended up basically being right in that scenario. So I don't know, man, when it comes to Sanders, I'm not there yet with him at 3. As it stands now, he's not somebody I would want at 3. And as far as Dart goes, I want to watch more before I opine on him.
That's fair, bro.
Yeah. I'll say this. It's very unlikely I would want the Giants to take Dart at 3. Very, very unlikely.
No, absolutely. And again, another big option with the 3rd, and we'll talk about this a lot in the coming months, is a trade down if there's 2 to tango. If there's 2 to tango, and if the Giants could trade down and have just, 80% of the success that they had in the 2024 draft class, maybe this team will actually start to turn around. But recent history doesn't say that that's plausible, with the previous drafts from Joe Shane that have not turned out as well. The 2020.
And let's just say this on that front, Nick, like they found a lot of success in the 2024 draft, but they didn't do it the hard way, in my opinion, or let's say not the hard way. Let's try to find a good way to describe it. They didn't do it like the way we believe, you and I, that leads toward long-term success. For example, some of their success was a running back. How hard is it to draft a running back? Yeah. Some of their success was a wide receiver like Neighbors, right? They didn't get trench guys. this regime is still not proven they could figure out how to draft trench players. To be completely honest with you.
Is there one?
No, they've had horrible trench players.
That's crazy. That's crazy to think about.
It's a big thing to consider. Like when John Mara says, "Oh, one of the biggest talking points for why we kept Joe Shane was this 2024 class." Well, he didn't hit any O lineman or D lineman. So and every time he's tried to do that, Ozudu, whatever it's been, he's been dead wrong on them across the board, with the exception of Thibodeau, who wasn't a dead wrong pick, but wasn't obviously like an amazing pick so far. So.
Yeah, I'm not like it's tough. Like I'm not sitting there saying, "Oh, Thibodeau's a hit," because this is somebody who was drafted in the top 5. He's not playing like a top 5 pick. So you can realistically say that that's a miss, even though I think he's an above average player. It depends on how you really want to quantify that selection. Now, the thing is, though, Is it on the Giants coaching staff, or is it on Joe Schoen's ability to evaluate and the front office's ability to evaluate? And that's where I think like it's not going to be stated. And we've mentioned this on the podcast before. It's not going to be stated by Joe Schoen or Brian Dable, but there's probably a little bit of uncomfortability between those two aspects. Like, hey, I'm giving you people, I'm drafting people for your coaching staff to develop. Why are they not being developed? And that goes for Evan Neal, and that goes for Josh Azudu, and even to a much lesser degree, the DJ Davidsons and the Jordan Rileys. Those are day 3 picks. To me, that's just, hey, we can neglect the defensive line because we have Andre Patterson, and we'll give him day 3 picks, and he'll turn them into respectable options. That hasn't really happened. Now, Andre Patterson's one of the best coaches on the staff. That is not a slight on him, but I think it's more of the respect that the Giants front office has for his ability to develop talent that they didn't have, they could overlook and address the other many needs that the Giants have had over the last 3 or 4 years. Now, I really think they need to be like, we need to get a really good defensive lineman at either 34 or even in the first round if the Giants trade back, or even at 3 if they love Mason Graham. I still got to do my Mason Graham and Will Johnson evaluations and really hone in and study that Michigan defense, and I'm excited to do that.
Yep, and I'll say this, Nick, one final thing we'll leave off on. This will be it. I think it'll sound, I don't want to say hypocritical, but it'll sound interesting to some that we made the case throughout this podcast for years that like quarterback is such an important position. And we're not necessarily like the most aggressive when it comes to quarterbacks. We were open to, if you listen back, we were open to McCarthy at 6. We still preferred Neighbors, but we were open to that. But we didn't want Nix over Neighbors, Bo Nix. We didn't want Michael Penix over Neighbors, and I stand by both. Like, I wouldn't trade Neighbors right now for Michael Penix or Bo Nix, even knowing what I know from season 1 with Bo Nix. I personally have my own thoughts on that. Let's let that ride out. Would you?
I could be talked into that for sure. Like,
okay.
I didn't hate Bo Nix's tape. I remember, I think I texted you saying,
but
yeah, I texted you. I was like,
get Sean Payton?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like, I didn't know. No. I liked Bo Nix's tape more than I thought I would because the consensus around him was negative from what I was just hearing on Twitter. But I still didn't want to take him at 6 over Malik Neighbors. Watching some Denver tape, though, I'm like, I see some good stuff from Bo. It
looked really good, right?
And he's a quarterback on a cost-effective contract. And I remain uncertain if I would have Shedeur Sanders over him, right? Like, I don't think I would now. That's one of the reasons why I'm not considering him. But I have to watch that tape. But the opportunity cost of last year's draft was Malik Neighbors. And I don't think there's a Malik Neighbors in this year's draft class if it's not Hunter. And Hunter might be gone by pick 3, right? I love this receiver class too. From the receivers that I have seen, I really think the Giants could get a really good one on possibly day 3, like in the 4th round. You could get a really good receiver because there's so many and there's so much variety within this receiver class. But yeah, I don't know. I can possibly be talked into it, but I have so much respect and love for what I've seen from Malik Neighbors so far. And I think he could be a top 5 wide receiver. I know getting the quarterback situated is still my primary concern, and Nick's being on the roster, that would situate it, I think. So that's why I'm open to it. But I know where you're coming from. You just think this is more Sean Payton's work and Nick's is a little bit more of a passenger, not to take anything away from him. Somewhat,
but I also want to give him his credit. No, I don't think it was just Sean. My more concern is that CJ Stroud tape year 1 to year 2, Davis Mills tape year 1 to year 2, Daniel Jones tape year 1 to year 2. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always we know this. It's not always linear. I think that example is even more prescient for quarterback than any other position. That I feel like we'll see, because Nick's definitely showed me a lot. Like, that's my point. Like, I'm not open to the trade. I still would personally want Neighbors, and I wouldn't really do it. But I'm way more open than I ever would have been before last year's draft because Nick's tape, like you said, like I watched Nick's tape last year with the Broncos at times for
He's Beyond a tough kind of a bitch too. He's a tough
good tape, and he's got a little it factor. He runs well. He threw the biggest concern I had was, will teams just condense the field on him because of his arm talent? And he did challenge vertically, and at times he hit vertically. The Marvin Mims pass against the Browns on Monday Night Football was one of the best throws of the year. So he changed a lot of my opinion, and that's part of this game. Like, you have to change what you think, because like we always say, like, we don't know how it's going to look against the NFL competition. If you watch that Oregon offense, Nick, and I know you did, like, he didn't run, like, that Oregon offense didn't really showcase any of what Sean Payton was able to showcase in his game. So it's a pure projection as far as before the year. Now that we've seen it on tape, you can see that he's got different kinds of talent that Sean Payton saw, somehow was able to project and put in the system. So I do believe there's a chance that after this year, Nick, I will be like, nope, I was wrong to say it. February 24th, 2025, I should have been willing to trade Malik Neighbors for Bo Nix right at that moment. I know that might happen next year. I also think there's a chance next year, February 24th, 2026, we could be saying, thank God we never considered, or, thank God you would never consider trading Malik Neighbors for Bo Nix. So I think it's just hard with quarterbacks to judge after year one. Some, Jaden Daniels, I think, but that could even potentially regress too. You just don't know until, because last year, Stroud, no one would have ever thought he would have regressed the way he did, at least statistically and on film, the way he did last year. No one would have ever thought that thing, dude. So it's very tough with these quarterbacks, but I will say this just to wrap it up. But where were we going before we got into Knicks? Was it, as far as where we're at with quarterbacks, we always are going to believe in opportunity cost when it comes to the quarterbacks. And at least for me, I've always said this. I have a very high bar for what I want for a top 5 pick at quarterback. I've started to lower that bar, Nick. I really have, because at some point you have to just take a swing on these players. And maybe if I thought about that last year, a Knicks or a Penix, I would have been more willing to take that swing over Neighbors last year. Maybe I should. You're never going to be right, is all I know 100% of the time. And anyone who thinks that you should be 100% right on quarterbacks is a total fucking idiot, because Tom Brady goes in round 6 and countless examples. Drew Brees in round 2. These are Hall of Fame players that the NFL passed up on for 30 picks or 100 picks. And, even Mahomes wasn't a top 1-1 pick. Like, why shouldn't Mahomes go 1-1, right? It's because it's hard to evaluate these guys. You have to make a projection about what because their tape at college level is not going to translate 1-to-1 to their tape at the NFL level. So we'll try to do that. We'll try to make those projections as we move forward. We've got a lot to watch on the quarterbacks. We're going to get to all of them. In the meantime, Nick, anything else on the Giants options at quarterback?
No, there's plenty of options. Hopefully the Giants can figure it out, because it's something that's evaded them for quite a while now.
They need to figure it out. We need to get something going at quarterback ASAP. I think it's why Nick and I are interested in Stafford, depending on what the cost will be. We'll see what happens. It's a long off season to go. Thanks again for tuning in to Big Blue Banter. Have a great rest of your week or weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.